you would bring, if you would bring the PowerPoint up, please. And just move us to the first.
I think Andreas is going to do it.
Oh, all right. Andreas, if you would bring it up.
You had the PowerPoint, I was going to control it, but
I'm not sure that's possible.
okay, well then you're going to control it because
Then I will bring it up. How
All
about that?
right.
Okay, we need to, okay.
I'm
Very
new
good.
at this, remember? That only works 1 year. After this, I got to know what I'm doing.
There you go.
All right, so if we can go to the next slide, Connie. The first few slides here are going to just be some introductory things. Some of them are important things to know about global grants, and then there are some new things to know. And Andreas, as our global grants chair, is going to go into more depth about these things as he works through the presentation. But our purpose tonight is to understand the grant model, particularly the global grant model, because that's what we're focusing on here. And clubs are required to meet certain qualifications in order to participate in either or both types of grants. And we're going to be talking about what is a part of qualification. Clubs also need to sign a memorandum of understanding. And the people who sign that are your club president of 23-24 and your club president of 24-25, because the planning and the submission of the grant may happen in this Rotary year, but most of it will carry over into the next Rotary year. So that's a way of the club being able to say, yes, both of our presidents have read this and are in agreement. Then there's a document called Terms and Conditions. These are the things that you're agreeing to when you sign the Memorandum of Understanding. And Andreas will speak to several of those. And then to understand the process of developing an acceptable grant package. So that's kind of our purpose here tonight, to touch on those particular topics. Next slide, please. So club qualification. Clubs are not required to donate to annual fund share, but clubs are very strongly encouraged, because it's from annual fund share that the dollars come to fund global grants. So if you're going to request a grant and ask for district support, it makes sense that you would have been a part of supporting that annual fund share to raise those dollars. And we do a 3-year look back to see what your club's contributions have been over the previous 3 years. Another qualification is that you have to have goals in Rotary Club Central for 2024-25 in order to be qualified. At least one club member needs to complete grant training. That's why you're here tonight. The project involves active participation by Rotarians. And this one I want to talk a little bit more about in a couple of minutes, an up-to-date financial management plan. Now that club MOU has to be filed with the district. That's Connie who keeps that. And then, as I said before, your signature on it says that you agree with the terms and conditions of participation in the grant program. Next slide, please. The recording will be posted on the district website's YouTube channel, and you'll get a notification as to when it's available, so you have it to go back and take a look at. You know, everybody wants to have a successful project. That's what everybody's desired outcome is. And I think sometimes we get really focused on the project, and we should, because we want it to be great. And it's a way that we get our own sense of satisfaction that our club did this project and we touched X number of lives, or we made things better for X number of people, or we changed this kind of issue that was in that country and now their lives are better. But a good project is really bigger than just the project itself. It's the planning that goes before it, and it's the follow-up and the monitoring that comes after it. So it's really a process. And that process has to be successful in order for the whole package to be successful and for your club to remain in good standing with the district and with Rotary International so that you can continue future participation. Well, what does that mean? Managing the process. Well, you kind of see a laundry list here. I'm not going to read through each one of those. You can see them yourself, but those are the pieces of planning prior to and the pieces of monitoring and reporting and creating sustainability after the project itself is complete. So don't just focus on the project, focus on the process from beginning to end. Next slide. Now that financial management plan, this speaks to how in your club you manage finances and the money that is coming to you as a result of receiving either a district grant or a global grant. It applies to both. Now, the title, I suppose, can seem kind of, maybe overwhelming or a little bit stressful, but this is really just about best practices in managing money. Things like having segregation of duties, things like making sure you have receipts for every wire transfer, every check that you wrote for this grant, retaining your records for 5 years, having 2 signatures on every check that is written. And we have a sample plan. So if your club does not have an up-to-date financial management plan, and we updated them last year for all those clubs that participated in the grant project or the grant process. So if you didn't submit one last year because it was required of you to do so, and you're going to have a grant this year, then we need to do a financial management plan for your club that is current in 2024. And we have a template that you can use to help guide you through it. You don't have to create this all yourself from scratch. So I'll be reaching out to those clubs that indicate they're going to go forward with a grant to make sure that you get your financial management plan written, approved by your board, and submitted to the district. Next slide, Connie, please. Bank account management. There's a little difference between a dedicated separate account for district grants than it is for global grants. But for global grants, it is required that you have a dedicated separate account if you are going to be receiving global grant funds. And then you can see the remainder of those things, most of those other bullets we have talked about. But it's important that if you're going to be receiving the global grant funds from the Rotary Foundation, you need to have a dedicated separate account. Connie, please. This is something new. We have had times where a grant project did not cost as much as we expected it was going to when we budgeted. We have a global grant project right now that's like that. We have district grant projects that don't use all of the money that comes to them. Rotary really doesn't want that money back. They want you to find a way to use it on what they call a project-related activity. So what's important here is the bottom statement on this list. Please do not send a check back to the district for remaining funds once your project is completed until you have talked with either Andreas or with the district foundation chair. Because if it's $1,000 or less that remains at the district level, we can give you approval to use those dollars for a project related expense. If it's more than $1,000, then the district foundation chair has to write a letter to the Rotary Foundation to get their approval on how those funds will be spent before any disbursement is made. But this one's really important. So please, the thing to remember, do not return funds to the district until you have talked to Andreas or the district foundation chairperson. And we'll help you walk through how to use those funds. Okay, and with that, Connie, can we go to the next slide? Which is Andreas.
Hey, it's time for me. So just a brief introduction. I think I know most of you, but I'll do that. My name is Andreas Teisch, and I've been a member of the Rotary Club of Bay City for almost 30 years, coming up in July, hard to believe. And I began working on the water and sanitation projects in about 2010 when we started the process. And most of my time on that committee has been the shepherding of the funds. So people know when it's time to send money and who's supposed to send money and who the pledges are. And then I became the chair of the committee. And then last year, Cheryl invited me to take on the role as the Global Grants Chair, or as Rotary calls it, the International Service Chair, for which I just did the class. So that was really interesting. So off we go. So I'm going to give credit to Stephen Sundstrom, a regional grants officers, for parts of this presentation. I was at one of the zone meetings and Stephen did a presentation on global grants and I really liked his slides. And so I got the presentation and I copied the slides. There's nothing about borrowing from Rotary for Rotary stuff. So as we know, global grants support large international activities with sustainable, measurable outcomes in Rotary's areas of focus. A key feature of global grants is partnership between the club or district where the activity is carried out and a club or district in another country. Global grants can support humanitarian projects, scholarships, and vocational training teams, though we're going to spend our time basically on humanitarian projects because that's what most clubs are funding in this area. Global grants have a minimum budget of $30,000 and the maximum World Fund award amount that can request as a match is $400,000. Though the grants themselves have no maximum limit. We would suggest for your first one, don't shoot for $400,000. Grant sponsors can use a combination of district designated funds, we'll talk about that, cash and directed gifts and endowment earnings to fund a global grant. And the foundation will provide an 80% World Fund match for all DDF contributions. Next. We talked about this a minute ago, so I'm just going to put it here again. In order to do a grant, at least one member must be present, preferably somebody who's directly involved with a grant seminar. You've done the memorandum of understanding, and we really appreciate it if you touch base with me before you start the process, so we know if we're going to be willing or able to support you, especially to make sure that DDF funds are available. Next. What's your responsibility? Your club is considered the international club, and in order to do a global grant, you must partner with a club in another country who is called the host club. You need to make sure the host club is actively involved in the project and that you do that from the very beginning. Rotary is very concerned that there is long-term sustainable impact in compliance with RI's sustainability guidelines. We'll look at those in a minute. They want an investment there. The grants must align with at least one of RI's areas of focus. So though often they have impact in multiple ways, and again, $30,000 is the minimum budget. Next. So how do you get to 30,000 bucks? This is just the example. The Rotarians and a Rotary Club cash, plus the Rotary Foundation service fee. So if you want 10,000 to go to the project, you need 10,500. Then you come to the DDF for a match, the World Fund of 80% match. And then you can find other partnering organizations or non-Rotarian cash contributions, which are added on top of that, will not be matched. Next. So here's the picture. Now, what we've discovered is really to do a $30,000 project, you need $11,000 because that's the way you get to 30 more easily. 10 doesn't do it. So 11 from the club, 11 from a district designated fund, 8,800 from World Fund, and then the 550 service fee on the club cash only. So a $30,000 project really is $33,350. Next. So where's the money come from? Well, here's the picture. If there isn't any money contributed to the Rotary Foundation, then the rest of this does not happen. So unless we do work as individuals, as clubs, as districts, and organizations through the foundation, there is no funds available for global grants. So simple as that. Next. So you're ready to start. And in order to do that, you begin with a community assessment. This booklet called the Community Assessment Tools is available on the RI website, and I highly recommend it to anyone who wants to do a global project. It is the first and most important step for developing a project. The assessment explores the community's strengths, weaknesses, needs, and assets. It's essential to planning an effective project. By making the effort to learn about the community, you can identify the most relevant opportunities for projects and ensure that your club will make a meaningful impact. Any club or district that applies for a global grant to support a humanitarian project or vocational training needs to conduct a community assessment first, then design the project based on the results of that assessment. When you apply, clearly indicate how you conduct your assessment and describe the methods used. Could be a survey, could be interviews, community mapping, explain who you talk to, identify the people in the community who agreed to help with the project, describe in detail what you learned from the assessment, explain how the project you're proposing grew out of what you learned. You can make creative, but unless we talk to the folks on the ground in the place we want to work, it's not going to come through, and Rotary is not going to approve it. So get started there. District leaders can help you conduct the assessment, particularly the folks in the host country who are going to be the ones who are going to probably do the assessment. Next. Consult the resources available. This book called A Guide to Global Grants is also available on the Rotary website. I've downloaded it, it's in my notebook. So once you've done that, you develop a strong application by becoming familiar with the resources that can help you. Before you start, read A Guide to Global Grants. It includes everything you need to know how to get started. You should read the terms and conditions, the area of focus policy statements. All these are available on my Rotary. Pay special attention to the sections that specify what you can and can't be included in your project. You can avoid disappointment by ensuring that all the elements of your application are eligible for global grant funding. Encourage all members of the industry applying for global grant to complete the grant management seminar, which is what you're doing, and to learn how to do all the other parts of the project. Another excellent resource is the Rotary Foundation Cadre of Technical Advisors. Cadre members have professional expertise in areas of focus as well as financial auditing. You can ask them for technical and regional matters, planning and implementing projects, and navigating the grant application process. District resource networks consist of local experts and mentors who work with clubs to develop stronger projects. In our district, that would include people who have done global grants in the past, such as particularly Randy, who's been involved with one that's in an ongoing process. Gail is working on one. So there are people who have done the global grants themselves who are excellent resources as well. And you don't have to call Evanston or our cadres, but the cadres can be very helpful as well. Next. Select an area of focus. As we discussed, all projects that are funded by global grants need to align with one of Rotary's areas of focus. The best approach is to choose just one. Having a well-defined scope can help develop a stronger project. Remember that global grant funded projects also need to align with one or more specific goals within the area of focus, and the goals are listed in the area of focus policy statements. Make sure all project activities listed in your application relate directly to these goals. But as I said, there's also overlap. So I was doing a presentation to our club about areas of focus yesterday. They could name 5 of the 7, so we didn't get a perfect score. But we discovered that there was one that was listed as a peace project, but it also had economic development involved with it. There was one that was listed as an environmental project, but it also had economic development involved in it. So there are some overlap between the projects, but the primary focus needs to be on one of the areas of focus to make sure that we can do that. Next. Then request a preliminary review. So once you have a general idea of what you'd like to do, you can ask a regional grants officer to review your application before you start writing too much stuff. Grant staff members rely on the foundation's long experience in funding effective projects and on their own professional educational experience. They can help make sure your projects are eligible for grant funding. The earlier they get involved, the better. Email your grants officer to ask for this preliminary review. They'll remove your draft application, let you know if you need to address any issues before you formally submit your application through the Grant Center. They're most successful early in your planning. If the project's completely planned, it's much more difficult to make any needed changes. We don't want your club to spend hours developing a plan and learn at the end that the activity isn't eligible for a global grant. So talk to the grants team early in the process. They will be happy to help you. Next. Include a detailed implementation plan. As part of the grant, you have to provide a plan for how you're going to make the project happen. This plan should explain who will do what and when. Be sure to include all the activities in the plan and detail the strategies, timelines, locations, personnel, and other relevant elements and steps. Provide a detailed list of specific tasks that the host and international sponsors will carry out with people's names and their specific responsibility. Clearly explain how community members were involved in designing the project and how they're participating in implementing it. It's also helpful to outline when you plan to submit progress reports and to find a report through the Grant Center. Now, I find this to be a challenge because as much as the best laid plans of mice and men, right? And so we have a plan in place and then somebody either gets sick or they move or something like that. And so I think there's going to be, there are opportunities for backups to these, but nevertheless, they want a pretty detailed plan of how you're going to do it. Not, we think this is going to happen, but we know that's going to happen. Next. As part of your application, you'll provide a detailed budget that includes a description of what you're spending money on, the names of the suppliers, and the costs in both the local currency and US dollars. Ideally, you want to include more than 10 or 12 budget items, and you can provide additional details as attachment if necessary. Be sure to clearly explain the process you use to select vendors. The image that you see here shows the step in the online application when you enter the budget information. And it's actually pretty good in terms of converting the local currency and the US dollar pretty much the day you're doing it. So that's a nice thing to see. They're very interested in working with people who are local and close to the action. Next. As I said earlier, a feature of a global grant project is that the activities are intended to continue after the grant funding ends. It's important to clearly explain how the community will take over the project and be able to support and continue it. And some of this comes from past experiences where a well was dug and then it didn't work anymore, it fell in and nobody was there to fix it. And so money was spent on something that wasn't able to carry forward. And so Rotary is really concerned about that. So as part of the plan, include detailed information for each training opportunity presented in the application. If you answer not applicable to questions about training, it's likely to be rejected because training is vital to every global grant project. And not only training before the grant starts, but retraining after the grant has been, after the project's been put in place, so people know what they need to do to keep going forward. Include a detailed information about how you plan to measure and evaluate the outcomes of the project and explain how the project will be financially sustainable. So this graphic, which I think is a really good one, outlines the 6 specific ways in which you can make your project more sustainable. Be sure to address each point when you detail your project's long-term sustainability goals. You also find this information in a guide to global grants. Next. Include the plan. As we mentioned before, it's important to have a plan for measuring and evaluating the outcomes of your project and to clearly explain that plan in your application. When you start to develop your project plan, decide how you'll measure the outcomes and impact. By measuring the outcomes, we can determine the impact that we have in a community, understand the positive long-term changes that result. As part of your plan, you'll identify measures that will help demonstrate the project's impact on people's lives, knowledge, or health. The measures you select should be clearly linked to your project's goal. For each measure, you'll identify the method for collecting data and how frequently you do so. The foundation has provided several measures for each area of focus goal that you can choose from. You can also add your own. The application will ask you to specifically who will be responsible for collecting data for your project and explain how that person is qualified for the task. Next. So if you have cooperating organizations, that is Rotary, non-Rotary organizations are involved with it, you need to have documents from them too. A memorandum of understanding and things of that nature. A cooperating organization is any reputable non-Rotary organization or academic institution that provides expertise, infrastructure, advocacy, training, education, or other support for the project. For example, one of the grants that I shared with our club yesterday was a malaria grant in Zambia. It's a $6 million one, so it's pretty sizable, but they're working with an organization called Malaria Free Zambia. And apparently Malaria Free Zambia has a good reputation, so we're happy to work with them. Some districts have worked with World Vision and other organizations, so there are reputable organizations that you can work with. If you plan to work with them, they too need to have a member of understanding. And so it's clear what the responsibilities are of the club, the cooperating organizations, and the folks involved. Remember that under Rotary's conflict of interest policy, no member of the grant committee can be on the board of a cooperating organization. So you can't do anything for yourself. Next. One of the most important things you can do to improve your global grant application is provide complete answers to all the questions. Make sure you give as much detail as possible. If you leave something blank or unclear, the grant officer will need to ask for clarification, which will delay the process. Whenever you can, avoid answering a question with not applicable or an A. It's important to include details, but there's one place where we encourage you to be concise, and that's the overview. This is where you'll provide a general description of the project, including the main objectives and who will benefit. This section is not where you would describe why you're implementing the project or explain its importance. You'll provide that information later in this application. Next. So I'll make a grant successful. The process, as Cheryl talked about earlier, it will meet community needs. There will be a constant conversation between you and your partner. You'll have a viable implementation plan. It's sustainable. You have good stewardship of funds, and you do the reporting requirements. Adhering to them is really critical for making your grant successful. And see those happy people in the corner. Have one. Next. The online application process. So when these slides will be available on the link, then you can link to this. But at myrotary.org/en/take-action/apply-grants, you will find the grant application. So as I said, all the material that we talked about earlier shows up in the grant application, the assessment, the pertinent data to support needs, the grant number is assigned, there's a primary contact for you and who else is involved. They're listed there, district leaders get information. So everything will happen through this grant process and we will know what happens there. Next. So some things to think about: understanding criteria for travelers. If people are going over to participate at the site of the project, make sure you read the sustainability sections. Make sure you know who the primary contacts are who lock the application. This is really critical. We're having a grant right now where we're having some difficulty with who we thought was our host, and they're not locking the application, and so it's kind of hanging out in limbo. And there are automatic notices for authorizations that are grant generated then. So the people who need to lock the application will receive the word to do that. And then once all of that is done, then the information is sent to the Rotary Foundation, TRF, and it goes through there. Next. Collecting the funds. So before you begin the application process, confirm the pledges from clubs and donors. So you know where the money's coming from, who's promised to do this work with you. That's one of my jobs, was to keep a list of all those people, and usually in July I send them a note saying, hey, that water project you pledged to 6 years ago, we're still working on it, so don't forget to keep your club involved. Do not accept any checks until the application is approved by the Rotary Foundation, and once that happens, the lead club gathers the checks and sends it to the Rotary Foundation all at once. And every check must have the project number in the memo line so that they're all together. There are some other ways that funds can be added to this. So once you have a project number available, people can make individual contributions to your project as well from the Rotary website. But that's usually not what happens, but it's a possibility that's there. Next. How often do you have to report? Well, 12 months after the first payment comes, and every 12 months thereafter until the life of the grant is completed. And then 2 months after the grant supposedly is finished, then the final report is due. That at least is the process in place. Right now, the grant in Uganda is going fairly well, and they've done their first 12 months, and they're doing all the reporting as they need to do. So, and then those of us who have access to the grants can see how the reports are coming through. Next. What's in the reports? Details of partner involvement, what you've been doing, how the goals are going, how the area of focus goals are met, all the things that you promised we would do. They'd like to see how that is happening, who's getting benefits, and how many people are involved in it. Next. So here's some other tips. Take photos during assessment, implementation, and completion. They want pictures afterwards, and it's really hard to recreate them if you didn't take them while the process was going on. Keep track of data during the assessment and outcome. Be certain that the timelines are working. Make sure that you have a way to promote this. Make sure you have a plan about who's going to train the trainers. Make sure you have a plan for a training curriculum. Rotary Foundation requires curriculum be uploaded with the application. Make sure the curriculum is ready before you apply. Don't move forward until that's all in place. Don't try to jump the horse. No, jump the gun, sorry. Jump the gun. Yeah, well, okay. Don't jump the gun. Put all the pieces together. Now, obviously, some things will have less training curriculum than others, but everything needs to make sure that the folks who are carrying out the project in the host country will be able to carry it out completely. Next. And this is the documents, right? Any correspondence, including email, the beneficiary documentation, the assessments, the cooperating MOUs, the quotes from vendors, the contracts in place, the grant selected documentation, all the pieces are receipts, invoices, the stuff that Cheryl mentioned earlier. Make sure you have all of that in place so that when you do the final report, you'll say, oh, here it is. It's kind of like tax season. It's much easier if you've collected it all year to do your taxes than if in January you figure out you missed something from last January that you need to now track down and find. It's much more difficult to do that. So keep your documents. A couple more resources. So one more on the next, Connie. The Global Grant Resources are a website. I mentioned about where to find the application, but also in the Rotary Learning Center, there's a whole course catalog on how to do global grants. You could follow that through. They're actually pretty good. I've been taking a couple of them. So you can do that. And then there are 2 YouTube videos on the next slide. So these 2 YouTube videos also provide an in-depth explanation of the grant application process and particularly how to conduct a community assessment. So there's a number of tools out there if you wish to utilize them. That leads to the last page, which is who do you ask questions of in this district? And that would be Cheryl, at least until July, right?
Correct.
And then he asked Randy. We'll change the slide. Larry is the district grants chair, as I'm the global grants chair, and Connie, she's the knows everything person in our district. And with that, I complete my presentation and I'm open to questions.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and or put it into the chat and we will get it asked. And I promise you, I was not offline with my video and eating chocolate chip cookies.
What?
I was getting a message that my internet was unstable, so I decided to do away with the video and come back on here for the questions. So,
all right, well, you're stable now.
Okay, well, I was being good. I just want you to know that.
All right.
So, any questions for Andreas or myself or Connie, anyone else?
Arnie's got his hand up. The dog has a question.
All right, Arnie.
Thank you. About 7 slides back from the end, you said, do not accept checks and donations. And they all have to have the project number there, but donations can trickle in once people are interested and they give them to the club as a nonprofit and they get their tax return and all that right then. Is that a violation of what you're saying?
I think what we don't, you don't really want to receive any contributions to the project until you know the project's been approved. So if your club is collecting for general global grant gifts at some point, you could probably take some money and have that set aside. But if you're saying, hey, we're doing this project in the Dominican Republic and we need money and the project's not been approved, the grant has not been approved, then you shouldn't be collecting the funds.
You, as a club, you could know that person A wants to give money to this grant. but wait for it to be approved, because if something would happen that it would not be approved, now you have this money that was given for this project that's not going to be happening for whatever reason. And then the other part of that is at the club level, we don't want clubs writing checks and sending them to the district for support with a date on it that is prior to the grant being approved, because that is something Rotary does not allow. You have to get their approval before you collect the funds.
Okay, well, that's kind of tricky on the donation stuff, but I can see you don't want to violate the intent of the donor. And the location isn't always, we're pretty sure usually that it's like in the Dominican Republic, and we stay in honor of that and the donor. But the clubs change, like in this last one, not last one, but the one that is about to be finalized and approved. It's changed clubs 3 times, I think, the host club.
No, it's only we merged two into one, Arnie. We merged the Bay City Morning Project and the Frankenmuth Project into one project, with Frankenmuth as the host club.
Yeah, but I also included World Vision. That was a change, sort of.
Yeah, but they never would have been considered a host. They were a cooperating organization.
Yeah,
Right.
Arnie, it was always the Rotary Club of Santiago Monumento that was the host club, and they were trying to work with World Vision, and that kind of fell apart. And now
Okay.
they're taking it on themselves.
Okay,
So Arnie, does that answer your question about receiving funds in advance?
we'll be in compliance. Footnote.
Okay.
Don't
Right.
worry, we'll be in touch as soon as we get the note that we're ready to go. We will
Right.
let you know.
Okay.
I might
Um,
be driving all over the district to pick up these checks so we can gather them at some point, so.
I know.
Kim has asked the question whether the PowerPoint will be shared later, and the answer to that is yes. I don't have a date. We're waiting for the district presentation to be uploaded. But as soon as this one is ready and available, we will message everyone who's here tonight so that you know that you can get it on the district's YouTube channel. Other questions? I don't see any other hands. Connie, I'm sure you've noticed that Adam Vibber from Alma St. Louis joined us in the
Yes, I have.
process.
Yes, I
Okay,
have.
very
Thank
good.
you.
All minds clear? Are we ready to sign off on this? Thank you all very much for being a part of this tonight, and we look forward to entertaining a global grant application if you're interested in going down that road. And the key thing to remember at this point, if you are interested, start having a conversation with Andreas, so that if you're looking for matching funds from district designated funds, we are able to understand what you're looking for and whether or not we have the necessary funds available. So please involve Andreas very early on. Thanks so much, everybody. Everybody have a good night. Stay warm and out of the wind. Well,
Good night.
except for Scott out in Arizona.
We'll be fine. Thank you.
Good
Hi.
night.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Yep. Thank you.
Good job, Andreas.